On May 2nd, 2014, a man got out of his car, walked onto the M20 highway in Kent, and right into the path of an oncoming lorry, seemingly taking his own life. The man was pronounced dead at the scene, and yet the medical examiner would leave his cause of death as an open verdict. Many suspected a conspiracy, and for good reason, but why am I talking about him? Well, this man was Nigel Stepney. He had been Ferrari's chief engineer, having been at the team for 14 years, and he was also the man behind the biggest scandal in Formula One history. This story is one that F1 doesn't even want to acknowledge at times. Severe punishments, nasty politics, fractures and rising tensions across the sport, search warrants, arrests, and even a war on track between Alonso and Hamilton. This scandalous affair is one that was almost too tragic to believe. And this wasn't just a chapter in Formula One. It started long before the actual scandal saw the light of day. So if we want to understand why things happened the way they did, we must go back to the old days, to the McLaren era, and the man who ran it, Ron Dennis. The most successful decade of McLaren's history began with the merger of Project 4 Racing and Ron Dennis. In the 1980s, the team had won 7 championships under the leadership of Senna, Prost, and Lauda. And in the early 1990s, with the legendary Ayrton Senna at the wheel, McLaren looked ready to prolong their domination in Formula One. However, Ron Dennis's era of glory hit a roadblock, and McLaren found themselves in a prolonged struggle for nearly a decade. One of those stumbling blocks was the fact that Williams rose to the top of the industry due to Adrian Newey's groundbreaking designs and revolutionary active suspension. And as if things weren't already tough enough, Honda suddenly disappeared, leaving McLaren to find a replacement engine. After a failed agreement with Renault and a disastrous 1994 alliance with Peugeot, McLaren's problems were only getting worse. The rescue came in 1995 when the company formed an alliance with the German automaker Mercedes. David Coulthard's victory in Australia in 1997 marked the beginning of a turnaround for McLaren, who had had a difficult 1996 season. Things would take a turn for the better as Adrian Newey came on board in 1998 and 1999, with the Papaya outfit winning 2 consecutive Constructors' Championships. But at this point, McLaren had no idea that this would be the last time they would win a Constructors' title. In the years that followed, Ferrari, Renault, and of course Fernando Alonso took center stage, leaving McLaren to struggle for over a decade to regain their former grandeur. In 2006, McLaren would suffer a major setback when Adrian Newey left for Red Bull. With the pressures mounting and teams racing ahead of them, finding a way to get McLaren back on top was an immense priority for Ron Dennis. The team needed a competitive car, and most importantly of all, they needed a special driver lineup. They certainly got that. Enter Fernando Alonso, 2-time world champion and Michael Schumacher's personal nightmare, and Lewis Hamilton, one of the best prospects the sport has seen in a long time. Both of them were the horses to bet on. This race would have outside interference. Enter Nigel Stepney, Mike Coughlin, Trudy Coughlin, and an unsuspecting photocopying shop employee. Nigel Stepney, chief mechanic at Ferrari during the team's successful heyday with Michael Schumacher, was at the core of the Spygate controversy. Stepney was not just desiring a promotion, but also felt he was rightfully entitled to one when the strong alliance consisting of Schumacher, team principal Jean Todt, technical director Ross Brawn, and chief designer Rory Byrne came to an end in 2006.
At the end of this year, I've decided together with the team that I'm going to retire from racing.
His desire was motivated by a combination of factors, including his belief in his role in turning Ferrari into an F1 powerhouse and the disappointment he felt from unmet promises.
I am looking at spending a year away from Ferrari. I'm not currently happy with the situation within the team. I really want to move forward with my career, and that's something that's not happening right now. Ideally, I'd like to move into a new environment here at Ferrari, but if an opportunity arose with another team, I would definitely consider it.
In response to his comments, Ferrari announced a new role for Stepney as head of team performance development. Their statement read, after many years spent working on the Formula One circuit, the last 13 of those as part of the Ferrari race team, Nigel Stepney, with approval of the company, has chosen to take on a different role that will see him no longer have to attend the races. Now that's the corporate way of saying get the out. With his dreams dashed, Stepney would turn into Ferrari's worst nightmare. He secretly broke into the Ferrari factory and stole 780 pages pages of sensitive documents, which meant he effectively had the schematic drawings, technical reports, pictures, and financial information for the 2007 Ferrari. He then gave these documents to a trusted associate of his, Mike Coughlin, who was then also McLaren's lead designer. Their plan, however, was undergone when Mike Coughlin's wife, Trudy, walked into a copier shop, a stack of 780 pages in hand. She instructed the clerk to scan the documents onto 2 CDs. Now, ordinarily, this would be no big deal, but one of the most recognizable emblems in the world, the prancing black horse of Ferrari, was printed on every page. And for a copy shop clerk, that usually wouldn't mean anything, but this clerk, he was different. He was a die-hard Ferrari fan. Sensing that something was amiss, he asked the woman for her name, and Trudy told him. When Trudy left, this clerk decided to Google who she was. The man found out she was Michael Coughlin's wife, the lead designer for McLaren's Formula One team. After that, he used Google to track out Stefano Domenicali, the Formula One sporting director at Ferrari. "Dear Mr. Domenicali," the clerk typed. He then proceeded to reveal the peculiar story of the woman who had what seemed to be highly classified Ferrari documents in her possession. Domenicali found the message from Surrey the following morning when going through his email. Trudy Coughlin then received the 2 copies of the 2 CDs a few days later. She then destroyed the originals to get rid of the evidence on Mike's instructions. But little did she know, the time bomb had already begun its countdown. This event becomes even more intriguing when we find out that Nigel Stepney had been suspended by Ferrari a month ago on suspicion that he had tried to sabotage one of the Formula One cars at the factory.
And also in the last couple of weeks we had the news that the Italian police are investigating the senior race engineer of Ferrari, Nigel Stepney, amid all kinds of allegations and rumours about sabotage and espionage as well.
Stepney, of course, strongly denied the allegations. Those allegations, however, would stay in his shadow all his life. Battles broke out in the Italian and British courts, as well as inside the domain of F1 authority as the situation's severeness grew. It was decided that Mike Coughlin had behaved independently. The stolen data, though, had certainly reached other members of the McLaren team, but doubts continued and were eventually cleared up at a later hearing. The repercussions were harsh: a whopping $100 million in fines and disqualification from the Constructors' Championship were handed down for the unlawful acquisition of knowledge that was believed to provide an unfair competitive advantage. A 30-year history of mutual disdain had fueled Mosley's desire to deliver a blow so severe that it could potentially expel Dennis from the world of motorsport. It would be the second hearing, however, that brought the drivers into sharp focus. And what followed was something straight out of a soap opera. Fernando Alonso had joined McLaren with the expectation of being their #1 driver and a title contender, a status he had been promised by team boss Ron Dennis. In the backdrop of this, Lewis Hamilton, in his debut season, had emerged as a sensation with a stellar start to his F1 career. His remarkable pace and competitiveness upset the delicate equilibrium within the team. While known to be promising, Hamilton's unexpected prowess had become a problem for the team. He wasn't supposed to usurp the dominance of Fernando Alonso. Understandably, the Spaniard's competitive spirits caught fire, and part of his siege mentality was fueled by the belief that a British driver in a British team led by a British boss would potentially relegate him to a secondary role. The Monaco Grand Prix added fuel to the fire when Dennis mishandled the aftermath of a 1-2 finish, with Alonso leading throughout.
You know, when you're taking these decisions, you have to think for the team.
Hamilton felt he had been denied the opportunity to challenge Alonso. The Hungarian Grand Prix later that summer brought a darker turn to an already tense season for McLaren. During qualifying, Lewis reneged on an agreement to let Fernando pass and ruined his chances at pole position. Alonso really didn't like that. In a swift response, Alonso took matters into his own hands. And so, one of Formula One's most shocking moments was born.
He's definitely putting the harder tyres on. There's Lewis Hamilton queuing up behind him, and have they raised the lollipop to let Alonso out? Yep, they want him out of there. No, Alonso's not getting on with it. Only 1:40 to go. Is he blocking Hamilton here? Is that a bit of a tactic within the team there to give Hamilton a bit of a headache? I think it might well be. That's really... I don't know if he has, you know, David. I think he deliberately did that.
Ron Dennis was furious, and Alonso was handed a 5-place grid penalty. On race day, August 5th, Things had boiled over so much that Fernando Alonso had confronted Ron Dennis in the confines of his motorhome. Rumour had it that Alonso threw down the gauntlet and threatened to unleash a trove of incriminating email exchanges involving McLaren's test driver Pedro de la Rosa and the controversial Coghlan to the FIA. Max Mosley later recounted how Dennis initially downplayed the threat, assuring him there was no substance to it.
Well, I go back to the question. If you say it's not credible, then you must believe that from the very top that team was involved in deceit and cover-up.
Well, I'm trying to be kind.
Well, I'm asking you to be honest.
Well, yes, but the thing is that you don't actually know. If somebody looks you in the eye that you've known for 40 years and says, Max, believe me, I didn't know, it's actually quite difficult to say, well, I think he's telling a lie.
But Dennis had underestimated this situation, and he had underestimated his star driver. Alonso's threats were not hollow, and the most expensive scandal in sporting history was on the brink of detonation. On September 5th, 2007, the FIA dropped a bombshell, declaring that new evidence had emerged in the case. Instead of a routine appeal hearing, the entire case was set to be reopened on September 13th. As it turned out, the smoking gun was indeed a collection of driver emails sent to Bernie Eccleston, the commercial rights holder of F1. It seemed Alonso had followed through on his earlier threats, prompting the FIA to summon Alonso, De La Rosa, and Lewis Hamilton, and the trio was promised immunity, provided they were transparent. It would be on September 13th when the pivotal hearing took place. The team stakeholders waited in cold anticipation for the decision, a decision that would come as a horrifying shock to those from the Woking outfit. McLaren were disqualified from the 2007 Constructors' Championship and slapped with a record $100 million fine. Internally, McLaren was in absolute shambles, and unbeknownst to the public, Alonso had already set plans in motion to join Ferrari for the 2008 season, cutting short his tenure with McLaren. The wheels were in motion and everything was going off the rails. As for the Drivers' Championship, thanks to lobbying from Eccleston and the Corporation of the Drivers, Hamilton and Alonso retained their points, keeping the title race alive. Meanwhile, things were heating up in the McLaren garage, as Hamilton was 12 points ahead of Alonso going into the Chinese Grand Prix. Hamilton started the weekend in pole, but things got heated when he claimed the crew was trying to lower his tyre pressure. Even though he started out in the lead when the rain hit, Hamilton eventually fell behind due to strategic mistakes and damaged tyres. Raikkonen took advantage of the situation to win the race, while Alonso finished in second position, igniting a thrilling three-way fight in Brazil. Hamilton was in first place with 107 points, 4 ahead of Alonso and 7 ahead of Raikkonen as the championship finale approached in Brazil. Fans' enthusiasm was contagious, and F1 ratings were skyrocketing. Even before the race began, McLaren faced an unusual situation. An FIA representative was specifically assigned to them to ensure equal treatment for both cars, a response to Alonso's previous claims of sabotage. The race commenced, with Hamilton dropping to third off the line, and then everything went curiously wrong as he lost all gears on lap 8.
But no, he's slowing. Impossible!
Despite a remarkable fight back and an incredible season, Hamilton's championship dreams had crumbled. McLaren's strategic prowess couldn't salvage the situation. Kimi Raikkonen would go on to claim victory, with Fernando Alonso only being able to finish third. Both McLarens had finished on equal points, but Kimi had overtaken them with 1 point and clinched the driver's title for Ferrari. The series of blunders by McLaren, so uncharacteristic for the team, left many puzzled. The FIA dropped the investigation into McLaren's 2008 chassis in December.
The difficulty we have is that you're not going to find on the McLaren a part that was designed by Ferrari.
The best evidence, perhaps, that McLaren had sabotaged Hamilton's car was when he was asked in 2012 about the events of Spygate, only for him to say,
"I didn't know at the time, but I do now. It's not something I can talk about."
This certainly hinted towards a strategic game orchestrated by Dennis and McLaren, manipulating the situation to ensure the FIA backed off the 2008 car investigation. And before the dust could settle on the 2007 season and McLaren's controversy, on December 11th, 2007, McLaren accused Renault of possessing sensitive information about their 2007 car. A hearing was scheduled for December, and on December 6, 2007, Renault was found in breach of the sporting code, but unlike McLaren, they escaped penalties for reasons that were not completely explained. Separately, an Italian court would deal with the fallout for Spygate court participation Nigel Stepney. The court sentenced Stepney to 1 year and 8 months in prison for sabotage, industrial espionage, sporting fraud, and attempted serious injury. Stepney was also labelled persona non grata by the FIA, who warned teams not to hire him without first conducting extensive background checks. Nigel Stepney would also play no further part in the world of Formula One, and he only continued to work in the world of motorsports for a few more years before the tragic event that unfolded on May 2nd, 2014, when he was hit by a lorry on the M20 highway, seemingly of his own will. What could have possibly driven him to do this? Did the fallout from Spygate follow him and shadow his thoughts at every turn? Or were there more sinister reasons at play? Unfortunately, the only man that could have answered those questions was Nigel Stepney. For the teams, the ramifications ran deeper and lingered longer than anticipated. Mercedes, who were at the time McLaren's partner and engine supplier, bore the brunt of the financial penalty, a substantial $40 million. The relationship between the two corporations deteriorated further when Ron Dennis took the daring task of building the MP412C, McLaren's second road car, against Mercedes' desires. For McLaren, 2009 was a challenging year that began with their least competitive Formula One car in years and ended with a disappointing season. The championship title slipped through their fingers, ultimately secured by Brawn. After Honda pulled out, Russ Brawn took charge of the team and made sure it survived. Mercedes dreamed of having their own team, more visibility, and total control as they considered doing it alone. This strategy change needed McLaren's consent due to the exclusive alliance. Needless to say, they got it. Thus began Mercedes' reign of terror in 2014. The landscape changed for McLaren post-2010. They were no longer the sole focus of Mercedes. Despite being title contenders in 2010 and 2012, McLaren's competitive standing dwindled by 2013. By 2014, McLaren found themselves trailing by 2 seconds, and from 2015, the loss of Mercedes engines marked the start of an absolute circus act that was McLaren's partnership with Honda. This stormy road ended in 2017 when Ron Dennis, the architect of McLaren's greatness, was ousted following a falling out with his longtime partner and former friend, Mansour Ojei. The company's comeback began under new leadership, and since 2021, they've been a Mercedes engine client again. Despite winning a race in 2021 and breaking a 9-year dry spell, McLaren is still far from the competitive, dominating force it once was. And that, all of that, because of a series of events set in motion by one man who is no longer here to reveal why he kickstarted the biggest scandal in F1 history. That being said, if you're looking for a story that ended on a better note, you should check out my first video on my new channel, DFU Recaps, where I will make short 5 to 6 minute videos on legendary and current F1 races. See you guys there.